Hi there, it's Wednesday, August 6, 2025, and I decided to come outside today and do my filming and get my feet on the ground. I'm sitting on a blanket, getting that good grounding action and connecting to the earth. And I like to do that a couple times a week. I'm here in Hampstead Heath in North London, and one thing that is done so well here is having lots of green spaces in all the neighborhoods to get outside and enjoy the fresh air whenever you get the opportunity to. So today we're going to talk about what's going on with the earth. It's very, very active right now. There have been 405.0 or higher earthquakes in the last 30 days, and that's a lot of earthquakes. Of course, there was the big one on the Russian Peninsula on the 30th of July, and that triggered a volcano. And there are also 80 active volcanoes currently in the world. So that is like a ton of geomagnetic activity. And we know that that geomagnetic activity is related to the sun and those connections. And our bodies are also interacting with this. So there's this whole circular circuit that's going on between the sun and the earth and our bodies. And ultimately we are all one. We all exist in our own space in this big unified field. So when something's happening anywhere, it is also affecting us, and when something's happening with us, it's also affecting the field. So there's this relationship going on, and I'm not going to explain all of that. If you want to learn more about it, you can go study the science of it, but it is studied, it is happening. So I started studying or getting curious about energy a little over 10 years ago when I became a health coach, and we were working on healing some mental health and behavioral challenges in a situation in our family, and we were using diet and lifestyle, and that was very much at that time called alternative things. And there was this belief that people would have, like, oh, I don't believe in these things. And I don't really call them alternative medicine. I just call them healing modalities, and being open to different healing modalities and being able to try something different than you did before. We've been locked into this conventional paradigm and this narrative for over 100 years now, and now these distortions and truths that have been buried are starting to trickle up. And I don't think a lot of people are calling it as much alternative medicine anymore. Like, there's a whole bunch of different ways you can heal yourself, and it's become so much more mainstream. I've run into lots of people that thought we were a little bit nuts when we started doing some of our dietary changes, and sure enough, people have come to me and they're like, I got a continuous glucose monitor, and I checked what was going on, and it turns out I was in this pre-diabetic range. I did the low-carb diet, and I totally understand why that worked. And there's so much evidence now that you can heal and recover from pre-diabetes with a low-carb diet. There is not controversial. So there's really no need to go on to medication. You do have the choice to use prevention or prescription, and I think that is something that is going to come up a lot, because we do have a choice to go either way. And I'll be talking more about that. That's not what I'm going to carry on with right now. I'm kind of just speaking from my heart a little bit today. While I'm sitting outside, I just feel like I want to connect a little bit differently than an exact script. I have some books here that I'll get to in a minute. And the other thing that came to my mind while I was walking over here is that we tend to call things body, mind, and spirit because we recognize that unity, that connection of it all. And, I was thinking about this as I was walking over here, and I realized that actually it should be spirit, mind, body, because the spirit is really where the initiation of anything solid or matter comes from, and then the mind articulates it into what the action is, and then the body sort of takes the action. So we've kind of got it backwards, which kind of makes sense because a lot of things have been made a little bit backwards, and we've been led to believe a lot of things that aren't entirely true. And so with that segue, I brought a few books over here, and the interesting thing about things not being entirely true is that it's not like the truth has been replaced with a new truth exactly. It's just been distorted and taken into this new narrative. And, I would say that probably happened with the dietary guidelines, and that happened with sugar and tobacco and all of these things that, I get little pieces of these in all different kinds of books that I'm reading. I learned that when pasteurized milk became the main milk that was sold, there was some studies done about it this would have been in New York, I think it was. There's this book called Milk. I didn't bring that one, by Mark Kurlansky. He writes these really great books about one word, and if you get a chance, you can check out his books. There is one called Salt. There's one called the History of the World Through Cod, or something like that. Anyhow, it turns out that it was discovered that they did study it. They did try to make the right decision for the public good and all of that. And actually, raw milk had more nutrition. The problem was that the raw milk had to be tested because people were bringing in, this was pre-refrigeration and so they were bringing in the raw milk from the fields to the city, and there was no way of accountability to make sure the milk was fresh. So people were getting sick, and they didn't have enough people to test to make sure that they were selling it. So it was really a matter of testing and making sure that the milk being sold was good, but the raw milk was healthier. In the end, they chose not to spend money to have more permits and more checking in on what was being sold, and they just pasteurized all the milk. And there was a big uproar about it, of course, because people noticed the difference, and you can go read more about that yourself. But the point is that the pasteurized milk, it didn't come because it was healthier. Actually, it came because they didn't want to pay for the proper inspections for the healthier milk. And so it was just, that's the way people won't get sick in the short term. And then, well, here we are now, right? So a lot of decisions were made about money, and that's probably no surprise to anyone. So here's a book I have. It's called Folk Medicine, a New England Almanac of Natural Health Care, from a noted Vermont country doctor. And I don't know if you've ever come across this book. I read this book probably a couple times a year, and every time I read it, I get some interesting little tidbits from it. And one of the things I was going to show you today, this is just going into talking about our emotional state and how that affects our health, because really what we're talking about that today is that everything is really connected. And and this book was written in 1958, so he would have been practicing for the decades before that, before he published this book. So this was before the dietary guidelines, before the big wars between, like, who do we vilify? Do we vilify fat, or do we vilify carbohydrates? And he keeps it really simple, and most of the stuff in this book is based on really anecdotal medicine. He's a country doctor, so he kept really clear logs. They were using things in their pantry for healing, and the four main things they were using were vinegar, honey, iodine, and castor oil. A lot like vinegar has a great role in this in his anecdotes, and he studies groups of people. He calls them human guinea pigs, and in this case he's using a urine strips to test the pH, and the idea that when your morning urine is too alkaline, then you would want to have some apple cider vinegar water, or make sure you're adding some natural acidic, organic acidic component to come back into that pH balance. And he says here that it was the fear and anxiety which brought the shift over to the alkaline urine reaction. So in this particular study, he's saying whatever, all the cases being equal, it was measurable that the cases where there was fear and anxiety of the situation involved, they were in the alkaline area, which made them more prone to viruses and bacterias that could attach to the system. So I found that really interesting, because while it's anecdotal evidence, I think we can still learn from that. And hey, test it out on yourself. And it's easy to order some of those little pH urine strips. You can test your pH. But when it's in the alkalinity range, you really want to try to bring that back into balance, because that's when you would be at risk. So he's saying that based on his stuff, that based on his logs of his community, people that had fear were having more alkaline and then more susceptible to getting these colds and these seasonal illnesses that were coming through. So the lesson of that is really to check your emotions, and that does swing back to frequency, because different emotions project different frequencies. And I'm sure if you really stop and think about that, that makes sense. You can feel the fear, you can feel people's sadness, people's grief, you can feel people's joy, excitement, enthusiasm, peace. All those things are these frequencies that are contagious, and they move through the air, they move in the environment, just like the breeze that is here right now. So that's one book I brought along. The second book, I brought a couple old books. I kind of, like I said, I think we have to go back a little bit to tease out the truth and see like kind of where the pivots went, right? So this book is called The Cycles of Heaven, and it's by Lyon, Playfair, and Scott Hill. Cosmic Forces and What They Are Doing to You. It sounds a bit ominous, doesn't it? But let's see, I found this book sometime during the lockdowns. I just had a lot of time to read, and what was interesting about this book is that it's since the 1920s, when radios became quite commonplace after World War I. It was really well known that solar activity interacted with radio frequencies, and disrupted the network when they were trying to do the broadcast transmissions. So people were working on it, and there was a couple of guys. There's always a guy. I'm sure lots of fabulous women were involved too. John Henry Nelson, he was an engineer in Manhattan, and he was studying the sun, and he came up with a whole bunch of data, and to the point that he really became the expert, and he wrote a lot about it. And he was really based on a lot of different solar calculations and such. He was able to calculate when these interruptions would happen, and also when there should be a pretty clear signal. And he's also, let's see. So that was done with the radio stuff about 100. That was in the 1950s. Like, they knew since the 20s, and then in the 50s they started having this system about it. Now, other research, and if you look at this graph here, these two graphs, like, see, there's the ups and downs. Those are the way that they graph solar cycles and different peaks of sunspots and solar flare activity. And there's no doubt in the scientific community, it's been quite studied, that during peaks of the solar cycles, there is more volcanic activity, more earthquakes, there's more general tension in society. People tend to have more amplification of any health situations. Storms are amplified, all of these things. And we've been building in the solar cycle, so we can see that that is true. And that goes along with all these earthquakes that we've had in the last 30 days, the volcanoes that are all active. And in the last 3 days, we've had a couple of M-class flares. Now, the highest flare, there's C-class, M-class, and X-class. I'm just telling you the classes. I'm not an expert. I look at the data. I'm trying to interpret it in a way that makes sense. Just like we don't necessarily understand how our Wi-Fi and cellular networks work, but we use them, and we don't have to understand all the pieces, but we can have enough evidence that it works and try to learn what that means in our own lives, right? And so the report is, where did I have that? The current report for the geomagnetic situation, it's quiet and stable, but it's really uncertain. There is the impact of the radiation coming from these flares will be coming in the next few days. It might coincide with the full moon, which is already amplifying things. So there is a pretty strong forecast for a lot of intensity at the end of the week and the coming weekend. So how can we prepare for that and know it that, well, first of all, going back to the fear, don't be afraid. Just be like, okay, this could happen. All of it is potential. And within that potential, what can you do? You can go out and get on the ground. You can stay hydrated, because there's a lot of evidence of what is happening in your body when the sun has these intensities and we're going through all of this stuff. And this brings me to this other book I have here called Electromagnetic Health: Making Sense of Research and Practical Solutions for Electromagnetic Fields and Radio Frequencies. And that goes together with this book called The Invisible Rainbow: A History of Electricity and Life. So all of this is sort of starting to converge right now. And again, this stuff has been known for a long time. It's really, the information has been repressed, and a lot of people have not been wanting to believe that electricity and electromagnetic frequencies are affecting our body. Well, if they're affecting the radio signals, and even in the last year, there have been radio blackouts, there have been radar interferences. So if that's happening to electronic devices, they are run on electricity. And guess what? Our body is also run on electricity. All the electrical currents that are running our central nervous system, our cardiovascular system, our hormone receptors. And so, of course, it's impacting all of that. And given that that's electricity, we need to make sure we have a clean circuit. So you want to really make sure that you're eating well and getting all the minerals that are activating that electric circuit. Like, we don't want to be the device that's not charged properly. We want to make sure we're charged properly with good mineral water, fruits and vegetables, plenty of protein. Protein is important because it's a really, really great conductor of electricity. I'll just throw in a little chat here about heart palpitations because those tend to come up a lot. Heart palpitations are specifically related to potassium. So if you're experiencing that, it's likely a depletion of potassium. So I would say find yourself some potassium, either in an electrolyte form, in fruits and vegetables have a ton of potassium in them, and that should really help. Also, muscle cramps can be magnesium or potassium. Those are some of the biggest ones that we tend to get depleted in and can make our energy low. And then that makes our vibration low, right? And of course, so these two books here are both talking about it's not just the most recent technology of our smartphones and our devices and our Wi-Fi. It's really since electricity, since electrification, and these have really dug deep into studying health trends as we've become more and more electrified in the last 200 plus years. And while we've benefited greatly from the electricity, there's also been some other things. And it's important to know that all the technologies can be a double-edged sword, just like we're able to do all these amazing communications so quickly with our devices, with our messaging, with social media, and etc. And honestly, like, all these things are coming to the surface now because of the technology. Yet at the same time, there is a shadow side of technology. So it's important not to deny the shadow exists and really focus on what's possible, but learn about it and understand it. So learn how to interact with it in that way. And in terms of this book, there's The Invisible Rainbow. You know, I had to read this book twice. It's big. Because I'm like, so what's the answer here? Because, you know, I always want to also know the answer. And he goes through a ton of different histories and how a lot of stuff is related. Different epidemics and pandemics and things, and looking at the data and the possibility of them being connected to advancements in electricity. And that's not good or bad. It's just something that really hasn't been discussed and addressed, and that's all. But the research, even as late as the 50s, I found this to be super interesting. So this research was done in the 50s, and basically all of the exposure to more electricity and more radio waves was creating a disturbed carbohydrate metabolism, which was interfering with the oxidation of sugars, fats, and proteins. And then basically the liver was creating the conditions for the liver to become depleted of its energy-rich stores of glycogen. And that leads to carbohydrate cravings and cells becoming oxygen starved. So it's sort of creating this loop of dysregulated glucose metabolism. And even as back as the 1930s, there was less mortality rates from diabetes in areas that were not electrified yet. So that's just I think the main thing The main thing to understand there is that one of the reasons I believe that we are more sensitive to carbohydrates than we have been in the past. Obviously, the kind of work we do has changed and are sitting less and things like that. The food also is more toxic. But then there's this other piece that our system isn't managing so much with the amount of the rapid change of electricity that it's being exposed to. So, because it's interacting with that glucose metabolism. So, here we are. It's going to be we're expecting the potential for a lot of energies to be coming through this weekend from the sun, from these solar flares, and there could be more. We're still coming off the peak of the current solar cycle. So the best thing to do would be really to stick to your clean food, get your minerals, get plenty of protein, plenty of hydration, and really pay attention to any sensitivity you have to eating a lot of starchy carbohydrates, because that's where there could be some interference with the metabolism of that, and that could make you feel a little bit unwell or uncertain about things. Of course, get outside, get some fresh air, get negative ions, and get your feet on the ground. That's always a great idea. And this video has gone on for a while now, but I just had a lot I wanted to sort of share. And I hope you're having a very good August and have a great rest of your week and full moon weekend coming up. I'll see you next time. Bye.